In Revelation 12, we are presented with a graphic image of the church of the Old Testament waiting to give birth to the Messiah, the one who will rule the nations with an iron scepter, quoting from Psalm 2. But the ancient church isn't the only one waiting for the Messiah to be born. We are also confronted with a terrifying image of an enormous red dragon standing before the church, also waiting. Waiting, as John puts it, so that it might devour her child the moment that he was born. We're left in no doubt as to the identity of that dragon. In case there is any uncertainty, it's made patently clear just a few pages later. The dragon, we're told, is the ancient snake, who is the devil or Satan. And he remembers the promise that was made to Eve back on the threshold of the Garden of Eden. So many generations ago, the promise that her seed would crush the head of that dragon, even as he struck at his heel. And so for the long centuries, the serpent has stood before the church, waiting, watching, so that it might devour the child the moment it is born, so that that child would never grow up to crush him. And in a way, that is the history of the entire Old Testament. Satan's naked hostility and violence is seeking to cut the bloodline of Christ, waiting to destroy the promised Messiah, should he succeed even in being born. Sometimes struggle to know what such apocalyptic imagery and language means in terms of real life. I mean, how does this translate into human history as we experience it? Well, there's little doubt in this case. It's the scene that never makes it onto Christmas cards or into the nativity plays that litter the Christmas season. Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys 2 years old and under in Bethlehem and its vicinity, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. Incredibly, unnervingly, the next verse tells us that even this was in fulfillment of something the Lord had prophesied through Jeremiah centuries earlier, as if to reassure us that even such a horrific atrocity as the slaughter of the innocents isn't outside the Lord's sovereignty and foreknowledge. We might begin to rail against the story of Christmas at this point. Why does there have to be such a cost for Jesus to come into his own world? It's a question that I think exposes our naivety about the reality of the world that Jesus has come to save. For the living God to come into a cursed world, a world that is under the control of the evil one, well, that could never be without trauma. That could never be without the peaking of Satan's hostility and the articulation of all that is most evil in our world.